والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. قل رب زدني علما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وإن خفتم أن تقسطوا في اليتامى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء مثنى وثلاث ورباع فإن خفتم أن تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعولوا. صدق الله مولانا العظيم. So continuing with Surah An-Nisa and continuing with the narrative concerning the orphans. And previously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has warned against misappropriation of the property of the orphans. And orphans may be male, they may be female, and when they're female it becomes even more sensitive, because obviously these are young girls, and these young girls were under the custody, as it were, under the guardians. And since she doesn't have the father, who generally is the one who looks out for the best interest of the daughters, so now if this guardian is not really on the track and he's deficient in taqwa, there's a lot of problems that can take place, obviously. And particularly in the case that this orphan, being a young woman, if she happens to be having property that she's inherited or otherwise, and she also might be quite good looking, so what used to happen would be that the guardian would marry the girl and keep the property or misappropriate the property. And if she wasn't good looking and she had property, he wouldn't marry her off and keep her, sort of under this duress, so that he could remain, benefiting from her property. So in other words, now we have a multi-dimensional misappropriation and sort of a situation of tyranny. So in this context, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns to be vigilant in this respect. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. So if you fear that you're not going to do justice regarding these type of orphan young girls and young ladies, and of course being orphans, this would indicate that they would be underage also, so they're still under their guardianship. So do not marry them if you feel that you're going to misappropriate their funds, or you're not going to be able to do justice to them. فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. So do not marry them, and marry other women whomsoever seem pleasing to you, who are halal to you, of women other than these. مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. 2, 3, or 4. And of course this brings up a huge issue, the issue of polygamy. And so here we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the license to marry up to 4. And previous to this injunction, the Arabs, like all the other people of the world, were a polygamous people, and man has been a polygamous species since the beginning from time immemorial. And in all of it's also interesting that in all of the revealed scriptures, in the books, in the Torah, also in the Injil, the previous prophets were very well known to be polygamous. And even in the Hindu scriptures, and even in the Buddhist scriptures, all of the traditional peoples, they were polygamous people. It was quite recent that the Western, probably from the concept of the Ruhbaniyya and the celibacy of the Christians, they were the ones who came up, of course, who were not following Isa alayhi salam, but they were following their own sort of perception of things, as it were. And they came up with this concept that, no, we must keep it. If it's best not to marry at all. And they used to have this perception that the women, they're the origin of all sin, and they're the sort of the fountain of all evil, and really a skewed kind of perception of women, and that has carried on to this very day. And that's part of what the feminist movement is sort of reacting against. Well, we never had that problem as Muslims, and we never had that problem in Islam, because we've always, as we've mentioned earlier, and as has been highlighted earlier in injunctions of the Quran, that women have been given their full rights and given their voice, and their rights were vouchsafed. Now, so what happened was that once you have forbidden polygamy, so now you're going to be faced with a worse situation, because why would you stop polygamy? Because we want to ensure chastity, we want to ensure women. Okay, so what you're doing is, and this is statistics, and therefore even Christian writers and others have written that the whole thing really backfired. So what you end up is many men with one wife legally and many girlfriends on the side, known or unknown. And then now we have, in this day and age, even marriages becomes kind of obsolete, and you can have as many girlfriends as you want, and girlfriends may have their own girlfriends, and boys can have their boyfriends. It's just pretty weird. It's a very weird, unprecedented, I would say, in human history. However, the system which was traditionally acceptable by all peoples, and was in fact the practice of most of the prophets, the fact that Isa alayhi salam never married, that had its own specific dimension and purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had, and some of them were actually Sayyidina Yahya was also hasuran, he didn't marry. Otherwise, the prophets, particularly in the Old Testament, they had multiple wives. Dawud alayhi salam, scores of wives, if not into the nearly 100 or so. So now what we're faced with is, in the West, you have this polygamy is a huge crime, and it's the Mormon community also face a lot of travail. They also have kept with that tradition. And recently, a few years ago, I don't know if anyone was following that, there was a fellow who had 5 wives, Mormon fellow. So we only allow 4, but they have as many as they like. Traditionally, now the Reform Mormons have also left that practice. But anyway, so it came to the court, and the 5 women said, "We're perfectly happy. We live as one happy family. So why are you, messing with us?" But the court, no, this is the law. You can't do that. And so a family which is otherwise, if you're allowing every type of perverted act to go on, and now you have this family living together apparently quite happily and quite comfortably and quite with a good understanding with themselves, and now you've broken it all up. So it's really just part of the, as we say, par for the course, that we live in a time where, as Nabi Sallallahu has mentioned, a time will come when not only people will not enjoin the right and forbid the evil, they will moreover begin to enjoin the evil and forbid the right. Okay, so anyway, so the permission now, and before Islam, of course, the Arabs had multiple wives, and there's many instances in Hadith where a fellow had 10 wives or 5 wives or so. So Nabi Sallallahu said, okay, you have to leave X amount, and so that only 4 remain, and they would, agree with that, and they would, fulfill that requirement. Now, the thing is that on the one hand, here you have one legal wife, and then you have, these girlfriends inside sort of engagements, which have no rights. Suppose children come out of these relationships, partnerships, or whatever it's called in these days. Who's responsible? Absolutely no one. And therefore we find fetuses dropped in the garbage dump and all kinds of really skewed. Here we have, okay, 1 woman is not sufficient for you, so 2, 3, 4, but the condition is justice. You have to treat them equally. Time, money, expenditure, houses, etc. Of course, the heart you cannot control. Someone, and this was also the condition of the Rasul, someone may love or have more affection in the heart for another one. That's not within the human capacity, but it is within human capacity to equal, the distribution of time and resources, and this is the requirement. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. And if you cannot do that, or you feel that you're not going to be able to fulfill that right, then فَوَاحِدًا. Then remain with one only, because justice has to be observed in any case. Of course, there is the issue. For example, we also have another situation where suppose a fellow has a wife which he's not getting along with, or he's not being fulfilled therein, whatever the case may be. But rather than having to divorce her to marry another woman, and that woman would now be left totally independent, there's another arrangement that is also possible. If they come to an agreement that, okay, the wife which is not really desired by that husband, but he will keep spending on her or keep looking after her to a certain extent, to whatever extent they agree to, this is also a possibility. Of course, that's not the best possibility, but it is a possibility. It would be better than divorcing the woman just for the sake of having a wife that he can feel fulfilled and satisfied with, rather than leaving this woman totally in the lurch. So, in every sense, you'll see the justice of Islam is totally superior, infinitely superior than the man-made systems, which always, even though they may have the best of intentions, through the deficiency of human intellect, it can never compare with the divine injunctions. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding and appreciation and the ability to adopt taqwa. And the last point I just wanted to mention is also these rules and regulations are not enforced primarily and initially by the government. Notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us about taqwa. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear the day that you have to stand in front of Allah. And then these injunctions are presented to the individual to be his own policeman, to be his own conscience, And of course, if there is discrepancies and people don't follow the rules, then of course the government is there to step in and ensure that justice is done. But primarily it is the individual who is to establish these things through the medium of taqwa and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his hope for the mercy on the day of judgment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. Subhanaka wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.